Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Opera Center. I'm Marc Scorca. I'm president of Opera America, and it is delightful to welcome you to the last of our series in this season's Conversations, where we speak to leading artists enlivening the stage of opera today, and we learn from them about career development, about what it takes to be an artist, how much they give to give us the inspiration that we get in the performances. We have a live stream audience and love hearing from our audience wherever you may be. I like going back to my desk after these transmissions and getting emails and seeing that people have been watching. So welcome here in the Opera Center and across the world. We have this evening Isabel Leonard, whose reviews, I have a few here, are just astonishing as they should be. For her Metropolitan Opera Marriage of Figaro, it says, Miss Leonard's lustrous, full-bodied mezzo-soprano and her exquisite comic timing seized attention at every turn. About the Barber of Seville at the Met, it said that it was the feisty maiden Rosina is her signature role. It was such a natural fit to begin with that her interpretation remains a joy to hear. And about Cold Mountain, it said the absolutely lovely Isabel Leonard was the most effective of the evening as Ada, and she sounded and looked stunning. And I've seen all of those performances, and I agree with the reviews. She is a multiple Grammy Award winner at this early point in her career, having won two, first one, or the most recent one, for Ravel's L'Enfant et les Sortilèges with Seiji Ozawa, and her previous Grammy win was for Thomas Adès' The Tempest. So again, at a young age, an artist of great distinction. We are so honored and delighted that she's here in the Opera Center, so please join me in welcoming Isabel Leonard. We are absolutely delighted that you're here, and the Opera Center is better for your presence. We'll have to hear you sing in the Opera Center at some point, and that'll be great.
Sounds good. Not tonight. I'm not warmed up.
I always begin our interviews by asking a simple question. Mm-hmm. Who brought you to your first opera?
My mother, apparently. I don't have any real recollection of the experience, but she says that she took me to see Les Contes d'Hoffmann by Offenbach when I was 8. And apparently I was very bored and didn't like it and wanted to leave. So she holds that against me begrudgingly for the last 20-odd years. So, yeah.
Was it here in New York?
Yeah, it was probably at the Met, most likely at the Met, since I was raised here.
So, okay, so I'll modify the question. What is the first, who brought you to the first opera you remember attending?
Me. I think I did.
Really?
Yeah. I went to see, I don't recall if this was the first, at this point I don't know if it was the first or not, but I remember going to see Manon with my college boyfriend over Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. Not very suited for Valentine's, considering the outcome.
If you leave early, it's very romantic.
If you leave early before it all goes, then it's really romantic. But yeah, and I remember just, I don't know whether it was the boyfriend or if it was the opera. I'm sure it was a combination of all of the above. But that's, I think, also one of the great things about opera, right? It can kind of heighten all the experiences you're in at the moment. So I remember that being quite a positive experience.
And when opera works, it works so well.
It does.
It's just an amazing thing. It doesn't work often, and we keep the belief in it because when it works so well. Mm-hmm. So the children's chorus at Manhattan School of Music. Mm-hmm. What brought you to that children's chorus? Is that your mother again?
Yes, it was. It was. But this was an absolutely positive experience. I was singing in the children's choir at my school, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and we practiced after schools and we sang for Sunday services. And then my mother decided that it would be good for me to take a so-called sabbatical from the choir and go to Manhattan School of Music. They were just starting a children's festival chorus under Christine Jordanoff, who was a choir director at Duquesne University. And she taught the Kodály technique to children and at the university, and she would commute every Saturday to MSM to teach us. So I auditioned and I got in as a 10 or 11-year-old, and I sang with them for several years. And that was really the beginning of the rest of my singing career.
Well, we'll get to that. It sounds like your mother had a real commitment to making sure you had a good grounding in the arts.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we have a very complicated relationship, which everybody that knows me knows is very true. However, I would say, despite all the complications, she's been very aggressive at making sure that whatever it was I was doing at any given moment was at 100%, or that I was in an environment where I would, if I chose to pay attention, then I would learn, And she had found this children's choir, and that worked out really well. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point or another in the conversation, but I started dancing when I was very young, and of course that was her. She's like, "You're going to take ballet." I fought every year. I don't want to go back.
I did want to ask you about that, absolutely, because in your bio, you also attended the Joffrey Ballet School, and I was wondering how old you were when you were in the ballet school, and how those two intersected for you, singing and dancing.
They didn't so much intersect at the time when I was dancing. I started ballet when I was 5 or 6, around that age. I was little, and I danced in maybe 7 or 8 years in the school environment, and I was in the Nutcracker at City Center for 2 seasons with the company, but as one of the children. So the first year in the Nutcracker, I was a Paula Chanel doll. And so I was in the white muumuu with little black buttons and super cute and rosy cheeks and everything. I still have a picture of me. I was probably 12 or even 11. And then the following year, I was a boy in the party scene.
Well, good practice for your repertoires.
And I always say now that somebody should have told me then not to complain as much, because, come on, a little girl of 12 does not want to play a boy. That is just, there's nothing okay with that. Absolutely nothing okay with that. I was very unhappy. But as I do even now, by the end of the whole experience, I realized that it was a whole lot more fun, because we got to be obnoxious, we got to run around, we got to pretend to play trumpets and disturb the girls while they were rocking their little dolls to sleep and the lullaby. So it was by far actually the right choice. But so I did that for 2 years as well, and I remember that was really my first experience on stage. And
did you have youthful nerves about performing? Did you get over nerves early on? Did you find that you were attracted to that stage energy?
To me, I think the sort of the extremes of the pendulum in terms of emotion weren't there. I was just sort of in the middle. I wasn't nervous, nor was I this sort of stage brat. Right? I enjoyed it, and when I got out on stage, I was in another world, and it was fun, and I'm sure there were some sorts of nerves. I can't tap into that now. Even in retrospect, I don't recall whether there were nerves. I recall specific things that happened. I remember one night, something happened. We were in groups of, or pairs of twos, and we had to skip along the side of the stage, and somehow there was a cord that had gotten onto the stage from the wings. And the first pair tripped and went down, and like dominoes, the rest of us followed. And I remember getting up from that shaking. And probably because I thought my ballet teacher would kill me, even though it wasn't my fault, but that's what happens in ballet, right? You think your teachers are going to kill you because for the most part, you're terrified of your ballet teacher, And so I thought, that's the end of my life, And I do remember the feeling of getting up shaking, because we had fallen, and I think I was horrified and embarrassed, and and then we all scattered off to our ballet parents, because it was the beginning of the party scene, and all the dancers, they were like, "Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, fine, okay." You're little, right? What do you know? What do you know that life happens even on stage?
Are you a nervous performer today?
No.
Just go out there and do your job.
Yeah, I would say The only time I'm nervous is if I'm unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of goes for life in general.
It does. It
Yeah.
does, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd be nervous if I were unprepared for a test. But definitely if I were to go out on stage feeling anything less than prepared, there's the nerve, because you think I'm going to completely
fall apart
in front of all
So-
these lovely people.
Rewinding the chronology, there you are at the MSM Children's Chorus.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point did someone say, you know, Isabel, you have a better voice than most of these other kids?
I don't know if anybody ever said that to me, actually, like flat out. I mean, I think it became apparent in small, slight ways. If I think back to those years, it became more apparent in that my friend Melody and I, for example, would be chosen to sing a duet together, or to demonstrate,
Mm-hmm.
or to lead a section, those kinds of opportunities I think that teachers will give to young students, so that it's not saying how great you are, it's by action, by allowing you to lead or to demonstrate, you're kind of doing both, but you're giving them that responsibility as well, which I think is a really interesting way of sort of positive reinforcement. I'm into positive reinforcement these days because I have a 6-year-old. And that's all we talk about at home. I'm like, Miss Positive. It's making me crazy.
Well, let me give you positive. I'm going to give you positive reinforcement for being so positive. So you emerged as a leader because people gave you these opportunities to demonstrate and to lead along the way, and then on to Julliard, and I noted in my questions here that between MSM Children's Chorus, Joffrey Ballet, Cathedral School, St. John the Divine, went to LaGuardia. Mm-hmm. So I guess even before Julliard, you went to LaGuardia for performing arts. Mm-hmm. As a dancer or a singer?
As a singer. At that point I was done with ballet. I was like, get me out of ballet.
Because
I fought against it my whole childhood and my whole youth. And so when I finally said the last year that I did it, I said, that's it, I'm not doing this again.
Too regimented?
No, it was one of those, again, if I think back at the sort of emotional state that I was in ballet, I got to a point where I wasn't enjoying it. And I wasn't the physical type for classical ballet. I just wasn't. Modern, maybe. Had I gone to Alvin Ailey as a 5-year-old, maybe I'd still be taking regular classes. But it doesn't mean I didn't give up on dance. I just gave up on ballet. Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be very clear here. And I just, I decided I was done and stopped doing ballet. And I auditioned for LaGuardia as a singer and as a visual artist. And then I made the choice, my father was a visual artist, so I had a whole portfolio that I put together and from school. But I knew that if I were to have, and I did get in for singing, then I would go for singing. And I said to my parents, I'll do art on the side, which never happened because, teenagers are the worst at time management. Mm-hmm. And but I did a lot of singing, and I sang a lot in the choir, and then I was moved up to the solo choir, they called it, in senior chorus by the time I was a sophomore, and I was I was sort of advanced in that regard. And then I did lots of solos, and later on I decided I wanted to sing with the jazz band. And again, the lazy side of me is because I didn't want to do regular music history class, so I took the jazz music history class, and then of course I fell in love, and I sang with the jazz band. So it's interesting how these things sort of kind of unfold in front of you. Let's see, what else did I go on?
And then straight from LaGuardia to Julliard.
Right, and then I went through the whole application process for college, and I applied to NYU and Carnegie Mellon and Oberlin and Julliard and Barnard and Julliard have a joint sort of a joint program. And I narrowed my choices down to NYU, to Cap 21, actually, their musical theater program. And I spent a day there, and I met some of the students at Cap 21, and then I spent a day at Julliard. And I actually made the decision because of the students that I met at Julliard, I just clicked with them. For whatever reason, on that day, I clicked with the people at Julliard. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to try this singing thing, I'm going to go to Julliard, and I'm going to hone in on my technique, learn my technique, and then see what happens from that point on.
And was it to be a singer, the singing thing, or was it for opera? Were you going for opera?
No, it was just singing. To me, it wasn't opera. It wasn't. I mean, I knew obviously the reputation of Julliard, of course, and even in high school, I was singing. All the choir repertoire was classical choir repertoire, and we did learn some of the typical Italian art songs that one learns when you're starting out singing. However, I never said I'm going to become an opera singer. It was, I knew in high school that I was developing in that direction, but it wasn't me saying, this is what I want. It was, I want to sing and I want to be in the theater, and now let's see where this takes me next.
As a mezzo-soprano, had you identified voice type yet?
No, I sang soprano all through high school.
Really?
I auditioned at Julliard as a mezzo because there were fewer of them. So I just thought, hey, why not?
And you also play the viola probably, because
I wish. My fingers are useless. No, I mean, I did, honestly, I did check the mezzo box because there were fewer, but it was the right choice. I mean, at least in terms of color. And I am not a high soprano, but I am not a low mezzo either. I really do sit kind of in the middle, and I sing some soprano rep, some mezzo rep, and whatever falls in the middle and whatever people will let me sing.
Well, it really is a New York story. Born and brought up in New York, and then to all of the educational institutions, including Julliard. And as a young person, did you take advantage of the other cultural opportunities in New York? Although you're going to Joffrey and MSM, did you go to concerts? Did you walk down the street and go to free concerts in the museum?
Yeah, it's interesting growing up in the city, because I have to say that the natural tendency, I think, for anyone in any city is you take for granted that you live in a city that has so much to offer, especially as a young child. That's, you're not going to walk around the city as a 12-year-old alone. It just, I mean, depending on your parents, but that wasn't going to happen with my parents. So it wasn't really until college that I had obviously that freedom to do whatever it was that I chose to do. And yeah, we used to, particularly with a symphony, we used to wait outside during intermission of the Phil concerts and wait for people to leave during intermission. And we'd say, excuse me, can I have your ticket? Like, do you mind? And some of them would give you nasty looks, and you're like, I'm a poor college student. I just want to hear the symphony on the second half, please, please, please. And they would let us have the tickets, and so we would listen to I remember we went to the Rite of Spring one weekend, and that was really fun.
Yeah.
And, we would just try to get into concerts as we could without having to pay.
For sure.
Yeah.
So when did opera then become clearly the path you wanted to pursue at Julliard? What happened that turned it to opera?
Well, I don't know. I still think I'm on that path right now. I look at music. For me, I look at words and music. For me, are where my focus goes, and then whatever genre it is a part of is sort of secondary. Not to say that I'm about to sing some rock song, but for me, it's always been the what's happening, the text, the story, the message, and so I've really stumbled into opera by way of being in an institution that teaches mainly classical repertoire. So in my studies in my undergrad, I mean, there were so many things to get out of the way in undergrad that had nothing to do with even the music quite yet, like language and diction, and just getting your brain around a whole other set of functions that we needed to learn in order to operate. I mean, I remember very clearly sitting in my freshman, particularly the diction classes, and we had I think we did Italian diction first because there are fewer IPA symbols, and the IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet, and they're really symbols. So you're learning, I mean, it's like learning Cyrillic. You're learning a different alphabet that indicates what sounds you have to make in order to pronounce a language correctly, even if you don't understand the language. And I remember being given maybe 2 to 3 pieces of paper that had lists of these symbols. And we all looked at each other going, what is this nonsense? Like, what? How could I possibly get to a point where this will make sense? And of course it does. You know, now we used to, because we were music dorks, we would write each other notes in IPA. Because, like I said, we're music dorks. And so, you know, you'd pass a note and it had all these symbols on it that said the, and it's like the O with a slash and the upside down E, and that's the,
so
you know,
funny.
and the blah, 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 blah. So we used to entertain ourselves in rather strange ways that nobody else understands. There was a lot to learn, and of course there was, you know, history class. Oh, and then there was ear training.
Mm-hmm. My least favorite.
Oh, holy cow. Ear training was astonishing. The first year it was okay. I had come into college. I had been doing theory at MSM because of the choir there with Christine, and we had started taking theory, so I was aware that it existed, which is, yeah, it's about as good as it sounds. It took a while. That also took a while. It's like learning strange math. Until it clicks, it doesn't click. And I do remember the day it clicked, thank God. But yeah, ear training was a very exciting blast into the past. We used to sit in these little desk cubicles, and we had to stand up and do our recitations for the teacher, who scared us a lot. And we were small class too. We were maybe six of us by the time we were seniors, and we all had to sit a seat apart. We're like, how old are we at this point? You know, 20? And we're all very well behaved in class. And we had to do all these exercises and this scale and that scale and all these. That terrified me. If I was nervous at any point in my life, it would have been every time I walked into ear training.
Oh my. Well, you know, even today, because you do recitals, you do opera, you still enjoy jazz, so that you continue to have a kind of mixed bag of singing in your life.
Yeah, and listening too. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't sing Leonard Skinner songs, but I sure do listen to them. So.
And the recital work complements your opera work? Does it exist in just a different realm, or do they speak to one another with you as an artist?
I think they do. It's, for me, the other sort of big theme in my life these days is balance. And again, because of my child and everything. And doing recitals and concerts and opera, if you organize it in a balanced way, you find, you know, moments of rest in between. Like if I'm doing Cherubino, of course, in Marriage of Figaro, that in some ways is a moment of rest for me because I've done it so many times. And it allows me during intermission to start looking at something new. Even though I would probably never look at another piece of music while I'm performing one thing. I just don't have the capability to really switch and focus, and I don't like to. But with something like Cherubino, I'll dabble. And that'll give me the time to do something new to prepare for a recital. And then if there's a recital tour coming up, it's a different amount of energy because of course you're on stage the whole time. I know whenever I walk out on stage, I think, why on earth do these people want to listen to me sing for an hour and a half? You know, I just think, why? It seems so long. So I have changed my approach to the recital. Sharon Isbin and I have been doing a recital together, classical guitar and voice, and we have become very chatty in our recitals. I'm sure some people dislike it. I think some people like it. I go with those who like it. You don't like it? I can't help you. But we've become very chatty, and we just talk about what the rep is that we're doing. She inevitably forgets something like her little cloth, I think she does it on purpose. It's really cute, actually. And so she has to go back out, and I sit there, I was like, well, I have no jokes to tell you. You know, but it's sort of become, I've stopped worrying so much about the supposed formalities about the recital structure. Or concerts would be a little different. I think it would be inappropriate if I were singing a C minor mass and I started talking to the audience before that just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. But in an aria setting, a recital setting, you can, I think what's most restful for me in that moment is to do me, to just be me, and that's most fulfilling, I think.
And I think the audience would much rather you be you than be sort of an imitation of a diva from another era.
Right, and there may be a time and place for it. And again, for me, it's depending on the piece. If there's something very serious, it's all, for me, it's all tied into the whole evening.
You went from Julliard and quickly started to win some competitions. So as you were experimenting in music and doing ear training, something vocally was happening that enabled you. It's the Marilyn Horne Foundation in 2005, the Licio Albanese Puccini Foundation in 2006, that these were important positive reinforcement for your career as an opera singer. So when you completed Julliard, you were a competitive artist already.
Again, I think in some ways by accident. During my undergrad, everything was sort of quite low-key, kind of under the radar, just studying and learning your repertoire and everything. I think by the time I went into my master's, it also became more apparent to me that there was a different atmosphere about this. Like, people were actually looking to make a living, right? And it changes your perspective a little bit on what you're doing, but you're still a student, and which is a good thing. And I think, as a student, you should be in a safe environment. It's very important. I don't think that aspect of all of a sudden your life depends on it should be mixed into your studying time, because it gets the line is very thin and gets stressful. But I did the Puccini competition, which was sort of, it was an experience. It was just it was this experience. I went in and I sang something and I thought, I'm never gonna win any sort of major prize here because I'm a mezzo, and unless I knock the socks off of Non più mesta or something, I'll get like an honorary mention or, which is fine. You kind of know in a way what you're capable of doing and also what competitions are looking for. This isn't about, who's necessarily the most masterful, technical, perfect singer. Sometimes it really is, this is an amazing tenor. He's sung some incredible high notes and he's going to win. Not to say that he shouldn't. But it's a different beast. Competitions are a different beast. And I was lucky that Matthew Epstein, who started managing me, when we talked about competitions, he really kind of made me understand in a positive way that it was a tool. That it's a tool, not much more. So I did a few of those competitions, and then I was lucky to win the other competitions without having to do anything necessarily, which are the best kinds of competitions to win. And I say that in all truth, in all honesty. It's lovely to be recognized by your breadth of work rather than all of a sudden coming out on stage and being critiqued by one aria that you do. It's like saying somebody, we're going to critique you on your whole life based on 10 seconds of you telling me about yourself right now, and it's impossible. It's so difficult. So like the Beverly Sills Award or the Tucker Awards, those are awards that when they present them to you and they say, this is for all of what you've done so far, that really does mean something, because you can go back and say, I have done kind of some cool things up until now.
Because the Richard Tucker Award is just one of the most important awards in opera. And it does recognize what you've done, but it also acknowledges your potential. It's saying that you may emerge as one of the great singers. Do you feel pressure from an award like the Tucker?
Yeah, on and off. Not pressure necessarily in a negative way. I think, I hate being cliche, but with great power comes great responsibility, that whole thing. There is something to it. When more and more people invest in you, you have more and more investors to please, or to at least give something back to. They have invested in you after all. And that's, I think that also ties back into when you're a student being in a safe situation, because when you're not a student any longer, and in some ways your life does depend on it, and now my son's life depends on it as well, it's very easy to let the stress of all of that take over all of the natural things that got you there in the first place. And so again, finding that balance so that you keep centered about it so that you can continue progressing is very tricky. Yeah. It's really, really tricky. Yeah. But then when you have foundations like the Tuckers and all these wonderful foundations who also then in the heart of the foundations, like Barry Tucker, who's the most loving person, and all these people, they are really there for you also personally. I could call him up on the phone and be like, Barry,
Yeah,
I'm stressed out, I can't do this right now. I'd be like, okay, all right, we'll find something else to do.
It's really true.
And that's really very, very helpful.
You never did a young artist program.
No.
And it is so rare these days that a singer hasn't done St. Louis, Santa Fe, Glimmerglass, Lindemann, name them. But you just went straight from your master's, some competitions, to singing. Do you regret not having more of that safe space? You've talked about the safe space of the conservatory. Yeah. Do you regret not having more of that young artist program safe space, or are you happy to have skipped that gear?
For me, it was, I don't feel like I missed anything. It was a rapid transition. However, for the way I learn kind of like by, trial by fire. So putting me to work was a good thing. Because I still do, and even more at that point, because when you're young, adrenaline still gives you a kick in the butt, whereas when you get a little older, it stops because your body becomes used to it. But when you're young, it really brings you up to that 100%, and so you always get a real rush from it, and you learn a lot in the process. So for me, it was a very quick, like I said, but rather natural transition, and also the rep that I did to start with were things like Cherubinos and Dorabellas and Stefano in Romeo and Juliet. They were all roles that were not technically the prima donna roles. They were, secondary, and it allowed me to do what I needed to do, continue learning my craft in a less, spotlight way. And so for me, it worked out really nicely.
And you mentioned Matthew, and Matthew Epstein, just one of the legendary artist managers in the country. Yeah. And his roster of artists is enormous and illustrious. How did working with Matthew help you in the early years?
Oh, in many, many, many ways. First of all, there's my voice teacher, right? And then, and she's like one leg, or two really. And then when I met Matthew, that was the beginning of the sort of the next stage, which was to do exactly what he did, which was manage a career. And it truly means what it sounds like, is you're managing different details in a singer's life and in the repertoire that they should sing, maybe should not sing, what they should sing in 5 years but not now. There are all these pieces to that part of the business that you don't learn as a singer when you're in school, because you're dealing with your technique and all the other stuff, the stuff that you have to do. So when he came along, for the first year that we worked together, he made me book all my flights. He made me book all my hotels, all my housing. He made me do all of it. So that he said, so when you really start paying us commission, then you know why you're paying us.
How interesting. How interesting.
Yeah. And I think he did this on purpose, knowing how type A I am. I probably never let Cammie book a flight or housing or anything until probably most recently in the last couple years. So I ended up doing it, most of it. Needless to say, I would not have had the career I've had so far without Matthew and the rest of these wonderful people that at CAMI that have been helping, and now Damon and Ricardo, who's here tonight.
When did Matthew first hear you?
Matthew first heard me at Santa Barbara, Music Academy of the West, Marilyn Horne's program, which was summer of... See, my brain goes, summer of 69, it's where my musical background goes to. Anybody know that song? Okay, good. I was like, people.
Whatever year. It was back then, in the last decade.
It was like summer of 2006, maybe. Yeah, that'd be about right, 5 or 6. And we met that summer because I was a student out there, and I did a competition out there, which I won, which then brought me back to New York to do a recital under the auspices of the Marilyn Horne Foundation here. But I met Matthew out there, and he and Marilyn Horne are very close. And he did consultations with all of us one-on-one. And when I walked in for my consultation, they both just looked at me from across the room, and they were just like, come over, sit down. And I went over, and I looked at them, and Marilyn Horne had this great big smile on her face. And then Matthew looked at me, and he was, I would like to manage you. And I kind of just looked at him. I thought, what did I say? I think I probably said something like, oh, well, that's very nice. Like, can I think about it? And we kind of became really good friends from that moment on. And we talked, and we shook on it first, and the contract came several months later. But that's where we first met. And he gave me a few sheets of paper with all of the repertoire that I would learn and do from that moment for like the next 15 years. It's funny looking at that list now, having checked off most of the Mozart.
I was going to say, was the list pretty? Was the list pretty accurate?
Oh, it's still very accurate.
Yeah,
incredibly so.
Yeah.
It's like looking into a magic 8-ball. No, not even like a real crystal ball. Something that works.
Yeah.
Magic 8-ball, that doesn't work.
Well, so this artistic variety. I mean, you do concert work and recital work. You sing jazz.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't sung jazz with a jazz band in a long time, but I would.
Duly noted. And your repertoire spans everything from early rep, Vivaldi and Handel, new work like Cold Mountain. Some singers really like to just bloom in a narrow range because they know that's where they're good and that's what they want to do. Others just enjoy experimenting.
Right.
Are you on the experimental side of that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the rep that I did for the first 6 or so years, as I say now sometimes, I just go where I'm told. I just do what I'm told. Because in the beginning, as a young singer, unless you're particularly already sort of advanced in your knowledge of repertoire and what may be appropriate for you, I mean, I didn't have a clue. I had no clue. And I still have friends to this day that tease me, and they're like, have you seen such and such opera? And I was like, I don't know. And then my friend goes, oh, right, of course, there's no mezzo part in it, so why would you know it? And I mean, call me naive, but I'm not one of those people that knows everything under the sun about the opera world or about opera repertoire. I will learn what I have to learn. I am passionate about what I'm doing at any given moment. Aside from having my son to raise, there are all these other things that I take care of and that I do and that I'm interested in. So there's a lot going on, right? I think
but it must be a huge difference in the preparation of a world premiere. Very different than preparing a Rosina where you can listen to, well, do you listen to the recorded history of people singing it? Do you enjoy creating a character for the first time as you did in Cold Mountain?
That was an exceptional experience. Incredibly difficult. Jennifer Higdon's music was particularly challenging. And coming from doing Thomas Adès The Tempest, I thought, well, I did that, so this is going to be a breeze. And I thought, I was wrong. It was very, very, very difficult. And she knows it. I mean, I've said this to her, so it's not like it's no secret here. But we say it to each other with a big smile on our face, and I said, you just had to write it that way, didn't you? And she goes, I know. Sorry. It's all, I like all of the music. For me, creating a new character is exciting because there's no performance practice that comes before it. You can really delve into it with the director. And doing it again in Philly was even more informative, having put it aside for a little while from Santa Fe and then coming back to it. And even Lenny Foglia, when we got together in Philly, had some new ideas.
Our
director had some new ideas about how to clarify certain things just physically and in the staging. And we changed tiny little things, but it was amazing how even some small little detail here and there affected our transition through the piece and how it continued to evolve for us as characters. And that was really very exciting for me.
When you're learning a new role, let's say it's a Rossini or a Mozart role, do you start with the words, start with the music, start with the notes? Do you sit at the piano yourself and play through things?
My sort of process is pretty much the same no matter what I'm doing, and it's I go through the music first. If it's an opera score, I'll highlight my part, and then I flip to the front of the book again, and I go through with, Nico Castel has given all of us singers a great gift, and he has translated and done the IPA for so many operas, and it really is a wonderful thing. And I have done the work, so I can say I've done what he's done with a piece that we did in college. What was it? It was a Baroque piece. It was La Callisto. It was La Callisto. It's not so unknown. However, nobody had done any IPA or anything for it, and so but I slaved over 2 different dictionaries. All my IPA, all the rules of the Italian dictionary, I slaved away, and I translated and I IPA'd the entire thing myself. And this is archaic Baroque Italian. And I did the whole thing, and I went through it with our Italian coach, and we corrected a few things. And so now I feel confident that when I use Nico Castel, I am using it with all the respect in the world. And I think that's a very important thing for me. I think not to be disrespectful to that much work. But I go through all the work, I go through all the IPA, all the diction, and then, only then, do I really go back and start looking at the music combined with the text. And then it just goes kind of in pieces. Sometimes I will, if I'm practicing, I will just look at the text, and I'll say the text over and over and over again, particularly in the recits and the recitativo, because I like to make sure that the language isn't forming the lilt of the recit rather than the other way around. And I'll go back and forth. I'll say a sentence, do the recit the way the sentence sounds, and then I'll look at the actual rhythm that Mozart wrote. And depending on who's the librettist, you take it with a grain of salt or not. You kind of go adjusting as you look at the music.
Do you still have a teacher? Do you still study?
Oh yes. Same teacher, Edith Burrs. She has been my teacher since the beginning of my undergrad.
When someone has attained what you have, what does a teacher teach you?
It's like having a really good car mechanic, It's like going up for your... I know nothing about cars, by the way. So if I say anything funny, chalk it up to being a born and bred New Yorker that I do have a license. I am qualified behind a wheel.
Well, having a license and being qualified are 2 very different things.
That's true too. I'm sure some people. No, I'm a decent driver. However, I know nothing about cars. Anyway, the question is that when I go into a lesson now, it still runs somewhat in a similar fashion as it always has. We will go through warm-ups, and it's sort of like going home to your parents after you've done all of your schooling and you're in your 20s and you go home and you're 14 again. They still do your laundry. They cook for you. You're completely inept without them. And I walk into Edie's home sometimes and I'm like, I'm here. She's like, so what have you been doing lately? I have no idea. And he's like, what exercises? I really can't think right now. And there have been days where I was like, I really honestly have no idea. I know I've warmed up before without you many times in different countries. But right now, I have no clue. So we work together, and sometimes she has new exercises that she's been working on with students, and we try different things out, and we work on the repertoire that I'm looking at any given moment. I mean, I still, to this day, have had a lesson on Cherubino's arias just a few weeks ago. We went in there and we pulled them apart again, which was painful. But
Great reviews.
you know, but it's amazing also because your body keeps on developing.
Well, I was going to ask you that because you're still such a young woman.
Yeah.
But are you still discovering things vocally as
absolutely.
and as your body changes, your voice changes?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, childbirth had a huge part to play in that as well. I mean, I went from physically coming to singing as a dancer, being in a certain physical level of strength and stamina from all of that activity, learning how to sing, having to retrain myself to let go of my abdominal muscles because I had no idea how to do that. And now, of course, I can't suck in my stomach to save my life. So it's weird how your body can flip-flop, you know. But having a baby was a big thing, too, because, of course, everything gets stretched out. And getting back into singing, for me, felt like doing weight training with weights that were too heavy for my body. And it was trying to wield my voice without the structure anymore. And so that was very exciting. And I remember thinking, I mean, I took a lot of time off even after my son was born. I did a concert when he was about 2 months old, but I didn't really go back to work until he was 5 months old, which is kind of a long time. Lots of singers go back earlier. I mean, everybody's different. Everybody's bodies are different. And I think it also depends on what you're used to, you know, what kind of strength you're used to having physically. But for me, a lot of it had to do with the core and redeveloping, then retraining. But I also took it as an opportunity to not develop my core as I had it before, but to develop it as a singer. So it was the breathing became really paramount, and it's hard to explain exactly the differences. But I thought if anyone were given a second chance to learn how to breathe, this is it, right? You're never going to get a second chance unless your body is like, you know. And that was the second
wonderfully
chance.
Described. When I look at your repertoire list, coming up there are some new roles. I look at Adalgisa in Norma, which will be a first, and a Charlotte in Werther, both of which are different vocally than the work you've been doing so far. Do you work with your voice teacher on those? Or do you have to discover some new vocal technique or quality to do something like Charlotte and Werther?
Okay, well, the truth, I haven't started learning them yet, so I can't tell you specifically. But I can tell you through learning other pieces what tends to happen. Particularly pieces like Cold Mountain, Jennifer Higdon's Cold Mountain, Thomas Adès' The Tempest, and Blanche in Dialogue with the Carmelites. And I mentioned those three because they're probably the highest.
Because in Ada is high. It's very high.
Right. So they're probably, like I said, in the highest tessitura of all the rep that I've done so far. And so in learning that repertoire, you have to learn how to sing it sometimes. You don't just open a score and beauty comes out. A lot of times it takes several steps. And I do remember very, very specifically feeling after I had done Thomas Adès' The Tempest, I remember looking at Edie going, well, this piece taught me how to sing A's. This piece. Not any other piece, this one. Because there were A's on every page, if not B's, but there were A's for sure on every single page. And all different approaches, starting on an A, going up to an A. I mean, it was everything. And it was kind of entertaining because after a while, you got this real sense of confidence about it. And so the next time I saw an A on the page, I'm very visual, it didn't look as high as it has looked in the last 10 years of my life. You know, anybody who sings understands exactly what that means. You see a note and you go, oh my God! But it just didn't look like that anymore. And now after doing Ada in Jennifer Higdon's piece, B's don't look, I mean, they still look high, but they don't look nearly as high. Now they just look like okay, all right, I know what we're doing here. It may not always come out great, but that's life.
How do you've talked about balance, and you've talked about balance in terms of programming, balance between new works and familiar works, balance that allows you to spend time with your son and pay attention to him and his needs. How do you, as an artist who is in great demand around the world, How do you as an artist catch your breath? How do you protect yourself and rest the way you need to?
It's a good question. It sort of depends on what's going on. I mean, on a very simple level, I'm very happy after my son is in bed to zone out with some nonsense TV. That's not a very philosophical or probably exciting answer, but it's what I do. And then there are other things that singers in general will do. I mean, actually, Matthew used to say to me, he said, there are like 3 types of singers, you know, something like that. It was when they're stressed, there's the ones that go and shop, and there's the ones that go to spas, and then what's the other one? The other ones that eat. You know, it's something like that. I was like, what about those of us who do all of the above, you know? He's like, oh, there are those too, you know. And that's sort of I would say coping mechanism. I don't mean it as a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you know, you start to, and again, the lifestyle also is so different. You're constantly traveling, and on one level you're always with people, and then on another level you're always alone. It's a very strange mix of feelings, because on one hand you know you become a very social person, and then when you leave rehearsal you're, you know, by yourself probably. That's like a whole other subject, but I would say I like getting massages, walks on the beach. No, I'm kidding, this is like a personal ad. I mean, I do, for me it's about shutting the noise off. So I used to, I mean, even when I was in my junior year of college, I moved back home because my dad was sick. So I went back home, and then I stayed there until I really started working, and I wasn't around any longer. But I would come home, and my mother would have WQXR blasting on the radio. And I would just, please turn that off, please turn it off. Just turn the noise off. I just need quiet. You know, I've had people singing in my face all day, or I've been listening to music all day, or trying to, you know, the oral input is just constant, you know. And so for me, and again, I know if I watch TV and everything, that's not quiet, but it's a different type of drone. It's, I don't know what that is. Somebody who knows more about the brain can tell me.
Yeah.
But it is about sort of shutting off that other part of our brains that are constantly on, and that's, it's hard to acquire the awareness, first of all, that that's what you're doing. There are some artists, and you meet them, they're on all the time.
I don't know how they do it. How they just
I
wear out.
honestly don't know how they do it, and it's complicated.
But what you said is so true. The dichotomy between being in a highly populated, active, noisy environment, and then when it's all over, even if you go out to dinner with your colleagues in the cast, you go home to a hotel. It's not home, you go home to, you know, back to a hotel.
Right.
It's very difficult, the two moods of loneliness or aloneness and being with people all the time.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting lifestyle.
What advice do you have for young singers? You yourself are still a young singer, and I feel almost silly asking you that question, but people, of course, are going to look up to you and ask you for advice. What do you tell them about studying or a career in opera? What advice do you have?
Well, you learn so much as you go along. I mean, on a singing level, getting your technique sorted out is always of utmost importance. It won't be sorted out in your 20s necessarily. It may. I mean, there's some very gifted young singers. But again, I think to understand and to accept that it will constantly change, particularly in the beginning, because every role that you do affects you differently, not just mentally, but vocally. Every time you get sick, affects you in the brain. You know, learning how to cope with the things that make you uncomfortable about it all. I remember, particularly in college and in my master's, because your body is still developing so much and your technique is developing at a much different rate than when you leave school, when hopefully your technique is at least mostly in place. Because it's developing so much and you're trying new things every week and every other day, sometimes it's working really well, and sometimes it just doesn't work at all, and you feel like your life is over. And to know that that's completely normal and supposed to happen is important, and just to accept it, just to say, okay, this is where I am right now, just deal. Just allow it to be what it is right now. And it's still hard. I mean, I still to this day, I go to a lesson and Edie will say to me, she's like, look, just be okay with it right now. She's like, it's going to be fine. She's like, if you were to go on stage and sing the way you're singing right now, it's going to be fine. You and I know that it can be that much more, and you'll be happier if we get to that more, because it's your own sense of who you are and your technique and the way it feels when you sing, and you want it to feel wonderful. She's like, but at this moment, if this is what happens, it's still really good. And that's really important to know, because then you're not beating yourself up every single moment of the day thinking you have to be this image of perfection all the time. And that's just not possible. It's completely impossible.
Wow.
Change is the name of the game.
I think that is great advice. We like to take questions from members of the audience, and I will, for the live stream, I will rephrase the question so that way they hear it through my microphone. So if you have questions for Isabel, please raise a hand and I'll call on you. Yes, please. Stand up and tell us who you are and ask the question.
My name's Kristen, and we saw you in the Barbarossa this year, which was my first time seeing the opera, and it really made me want to see the whole version in Italian. So I'm curious about your feelings of singing that opera in Italian versus the English version, and do you have a favorite language?
Well, it's a great question, and for the purpose of the live stream, you saw the Barber Seville for the first time this season in the sort of abridged English version that was done at the holiday time.
Special holiday version.
Exactly. And here you've sung the role in the original Italian and sung it in English.
Right.
How were the two different from one another?
Well, it's always funny to hear a translation to something that you first learned in a foreign language, that you already know the translation to, or you already have your own translation. And then somebody else is imposing a translation that you may or may not agree with, or that because for poetic license or the purpose of transmitting a story works better the way they have written it out, even though your brain thinks of it in a different way. So in some ways, you're now working with three separate translations in your mind. So when I did the English for the first time, it was very confusing. We were all very, very confused, not solely because of the cuts, but every time you took a breath, every muscle in your body, first of all, wanted to sing in Italian. And so that was very entertaining. And then all the other muscles were going, well, but I translate it this way. Or the word that I'm singing right now for the last however many years of my life has meant love for this melisma. And now I have to sing something else because whoever's written the libretto wants it to be something else so that it makes more sense perhaps to the audience. So there are lots of things to reconcile when you're doing it. And eventually, like anything else, it becomes second nature, hopefully.
Is there a language that feels most natural to you?
I mean, between English, French, Spanish, and Italian, I'll do any of those without any issues.
Without any issues.
Without any issues. English has obviously, being my first language, has its comfort. It's not the easiest language to sing in. I think mainly because of the way we speak it. Americans, even I am now speaking very in the back of my throat. Because I don't like singing and speaking like an opera singer, because I find it obnoxious. So I don't do it. However, I'm sure my teacher would think, Isabel, please speak a little higher in your speaking voice. It's much nicer for you. And I agree. And I end up sounding like that after concerts or recitals,
sure.
And everybody goes, oh, you've been singing, haven't you? I was like, why? How can you tell? But to answer your question, eventually it all sort of becomes second nature. Whether I have a preference, I mean, the Italian it's just like going back to the roots. So it always feels better. The actual act of singing feels better in that language. That's what it was meant for. But I do think it's an interesting challenge to translate, particularly something that you have to sing. There's so much more involved than just the poetry. It's the vowels and where they are in the register, in the voice. I would say the majority of singers are not super thrilled if you put an oo vowel at a very high place in their register. It's uncomfortable. And when we first did The Barber of Seville, there were a couple of moments where there were a few words that were in that sort of range with this sort of ooh kind of vowel, and we all said, can we please change the word? It is so uncomfortable. And I think that should be an art in and of itself, is translating a piece so that not only does the audience enjoy it in their native language, but that the singers are really put in a position of being super comfortable in their own language as well. And I think that's a tricky thing to do.
In the good old days of American regional opera, when a lot more opera companies performed in English, one of the challenges is that there were so many different translations of operas, and casts would come together and everyone knowing a different translation of it, or someone would get sick and you'd bring someone else in, but there's a totally different translation. Very difficult. It's a whole, you could write a whole essay about English translation of the operas.
I mean, even the second time around when I did The Barber of Seville again in English just now, when I had done it for the first time a few years ago, I couldn't, if you had said, sing it in English from what you remembered 2 years ago, there would have been a few things that I would remember. Most of it I couldn't recall because I had done the Italian in the interim. However, when we started going through it again, I'd hit these walls. So I would start singing with the music in front of me, everything was fine, the muscle memory, everything was sort of kicking in, and all of a sudden it would just go like that. And I was stuck, and I finally said to somebody, are we missing something here? You know, is it changed? Something is off, and I don't know what it is. And they had to go back to the other version and say, oh, you're remembering X, Y, and Z. I couldn't remember what it was, but I knew that there was some, so muscle memory is really interesting, really fascinating, yeah.
Yes, we're here in the front. Please stand up, tell us who you are.
Lisa Grimaldi, I'm a voice teacher and singer, but I wanted to say that you are so refreshing, because I get a lot of students that beat up on themselves a lot. And it's wonderful to see how unscathed you are and all your training. Commend your teacher very much for...
It's all the makeup.
Yeah.
You can't see the scars.
Because you're very unpretentious about everything and take it one day at a time. And I admire that so much, because I get a lot of students that really have to put it back together. Yep. When they beat themselves up, and it's just wonderful to hear this. So I wanted to come see this so much.
Well, thank you for that, and
thank you.
And you're unscathed.
I'm glad I look unscathed. I mean, I think, look, nobody's unscathed.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no one is. We all have our pasts, our demons, our troubles, and whether you carry them with you every day is your choice.
And how you deal with them.
And how you deal with them too. And every day is a different day. I mean, I completely fell apart the other day. I was flying back from Chicago, and I had a complete panic attack. It's something that happens to me. I'm fine now. I can laugh about it and realize you are completely ridiculous. But at the moment, it was not ridiculous. It was short of me not getting on the plane. And that's something, as a singer who flies everywhere, is a problem, So we're not all unscathed. But I am blessed, and I have been blessed to, particularly with my voice teacher, with Edie, because every time, particularly in my undergrad and in my master's, and that's, again, I feel a very volatile time, hormonally. Just your voice is constantly changing. I mean, it's like you can't hold on to it. And I remember the feeling, once I thought, oh, I've grasped this concept that we're working on. And the next week it was gone. And I thought, why? I just got used to it. This is so unfair, and there were days I'd walk into my lesson and she'd look at me and she would say, how are you? And I would just burst into tears. And I had no idea. I don't know.
One lesson a week, 2 lessons a week, 3 lessons a week? Did you ever take lessons in rapid succession?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Marathon lessons, yeah. Well, while I was in school, it was once a week, and sometimes, actually quite often, twice a week. Edie has always made a lot of time for her students. But definitely once a week while in school. And then once I was out of school, it's a different, again, you shift then. You shift into, if you're around, you could do once a week, but even now I'm around for a month and sometimes I don't see her. I sent her an email and I go, I miss you. I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm kind of scared of seeing you because if I open my mouth and something's wrong, you're gonna, I feel like I will have disappointed you, you know. But I have done 5 days in a row before. It's wild.
In a way, that's the way some of the old greats, used to take a voice lesson every day in that trip to Italy.
Yeah.
You make a lot of progress in...
You do. It can be taxing though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is no small feat, the kind of singing that we do. It's physically, I mean, not forget even the vocal cords, is physically exhausting. And our lessons always tend to run on for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So it can be quite the marathon. I mean, sometimes, I'd be away for a couple months and then I would come home for a week. And if there was something particularly, and not so much now, but when I was first starting to work and I was away for a month and a half and then I would come home and then it was like, oh my God, I have this next role that I'm doing and we had to do it and we had to do every part of the role. So we had 5 lessons in a row to make sure we got through it, not only once, but maybe twice. Mm-hmm. And you do learn
it's
a lot.
hard work.
Yeah, and it is a lot of hard work.
There's a
sweating
question.
just thinking about
There's a question down here. Yes, sir. Please stand up.
Hi.
My name's Craig. I'm not from the opera world, but I'm certainly a fan.
Oh,
I actually live in Japan, so we're really very grateful when watching the Met HD series. And I tell you, everyone was. I can't imagine how much people clapped when you came out. It was absolutely wonderful. It was a wonderful show. Anyway, just linking up to that, I was interested in one thing because obviously you're so famous for the trouser rolls. And in Japan we have a group called Takarazuka.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of these people, but they're a female troupe that sing and dance and a bunch of other things. But somehow they do the same thing of keeping something masculine, something feminine at the same time. And I want to know, what is that? When I see you, I see something very masculine in that role, and yet somehow it's just still gorgeous, and I don't know what that is.
So we didn't talk about it. So a question about and thank you so much, a question from Japan, and it's not even on the live stream, it's live, about the pants rolls and the challenges of being masculine and still being a mezzo-soprano, and how you have learned how to portray the masculinity but still retaining the loveliness that's required by the music.
Yeah. I just had this conversation with Edie the other day. But it had more to do on the singing side of things. But to address your question, the pants roll for me is first and foremost about the physicality of the character. And then I prefer, when I work on characters or think about characters, and I'm not somebody that sits down like, oh, I'm going to do, Stellar Adler technique in acting, or I'm going to, I don't stress about all of that kind of a thing. I just do my process, and the more I repeat, the more I find. In most roles, I will start sort of from the inside out. So if I'm starting a process of staging, physically, I may not be very communicative quite yet because I'm still working on where the character's mind is, where this is, everything. And then eventually it comes out and the limbs start moving and everything else follows suit. However, I found that doing the male characters, what worked for me was doing it in the opposite way, was starting from the outside in. Particularly in the beginning when I first started doing Cherubinos or Ruggero and Alcina or Sesto and Julius Caesar or Clemenza. It was, who are they physically first? And that was very helpful. Someone like, actually both Sesto in Julius Caesar and Sesto in Clemenza are warriors. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was about the warrior physicality, but still a young man. And then I would just make my own choice. Is he a good warrior? Is he a good warrior but a little bit afraid? Is he a warrior that has fought before or has not fought before? things that would have an effect on their personality and the way they stand or the way they hold a knife. And in those two particular productions that I did, there were moments in both where I was armed. And so I would start from the outside in. How do I walk? How do I hold things? And then when I do something like Cherubino, which I've now done for a long time, I've changed him a lot. And this latest version in Richard Eyre's production, and my thanks to Richard Eyre, because he really let me put together a Cherubino that was mine. And I would do things, and he would go, "Yeah, that's great, keep that." And "Oh, well, do that other thing," and do, and And so he's kind of swept from side to side, but I basically played around and I did whatever came to mind. But that was after having done Cherubino for so many years, where his physicality, at least there was some core physicality that I could start with, and then the world in which I was placed could inform the rest of it. But I've done things like where I have just, I've sat in a chair and watched a gentleman sitting and it's a difference between, a girl could still sit this way, but a girl might sit like that, just a difference between two tiny little movements, or how a woman holds their hands, or I have very long fingers, and so I try to make sure that I'm aware of where they're going and what they're doing at all times, even as a girl. Lots of physicality, particularly. And then the other thing that was a major, I think, part of my mindset was accepting being a boy. Because I came again as a little girl having to play a boy in the Nutcracker and thinking this was the most horrible thing you could do to a little girl, to then having to overcome the embarrassment. I mean, there is, you'd lie to say I wasn't embarrassed doing Cherubino for the first time and having to, hit on another woman, or that's not who I am. It wasn't something that I was comfortable with at first. And again, accepting that, and then eventually just working through it. And now, oh my God, the chorus of the Met, they've all been hit on. short of smacking them all on the butt. I'm in their faces and they all laugh and it's very funny, it's a beast unto itself, but and I still have to do it though. Every time I do a male part, even though I've done it so many times, I walk into that rehearsal room and I have to say to myself, okay, you're a female. We all know this. Now you're going to be a boy until you're done. Get over it. and that,
Wonderful.
That's sort of how that works.
Well, we've come to the end of our time today, but these last few minutes you have revealed to us the subtlety it takes to be an artist of your exceptional caliber, of the thought mechanism, of the physical, emotional preparation that you go through to be the artist you are. We are so grateful for all you do on the stages around the world and for being with us tonight. Isabel Leonard, thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the reception out in the lobby. We'll look forward to greeting you out there. And again, thank you for being with us tonight.